Picture this: a centuries-old linen cloth, over 14 feet long, bearing the faint image of a crucified man. For millions of believers, it's nothing less than the burial shroud of Jesus Christ. But here's the twist. This mysterious relic didn't show up in the historical record until the 14th century. So what are we really looking at? Is this the most sacred proof of the Passion, or one of history's greatest hoaxes? Some call it a miracle, others see it as a medieval trick, and that's why, whenever people talk about the Shroud of Turin Debunked, the debate only seems to get louder. Known as the Shroud of Turin, this relic has become one of the most controversial objects in Christian history. Its very first appearance didn't bring clarity. It sparked doubt, conflict, and a 600-year debate that's still alive today. In 1354, in the small French village of Lyry, a knight named Geoffroy de Charny unveiled an artifact that would later become one of the most controversial relics in history: the Shroud of Turin. It was displayed in a modest little church, but almost instantly it drew crowds. Pilgrims came from far and wide, desperate for a glimpse of the mysterious cloth. Many believed they were looking at the very burial shroud of Jesus Christ himself. They knelt, they prayed, some wept openly in awe. But to understand why this cloth caused such a stir, you have to picture Europe in the 14th century. This was not an age of stability. The Black Death had swept across the continent, wiping out nearly a third of the population. Cities were hollowed out, cemeteries overflowed, and a heavy sense of despair clung to daily life. On top of that, the 100 Years' War between England and France left villages burned, farmland destroyed, and ordinary people trapped in endless cycles of hunger and fear. Faith itself was shaken. People prayed, yet the plagues and the wars raged on. The church struggled to explain why suffering seemed so overwhelming. And then, suddenly, this relic appeared, a cloth that seemed to carry the image of a crucified man, a sign, a symbol, something tangible in an age where hope was slipping away. For countless believers, the shroud was not just a piece of fabric. It was light in the darkness, proof that God had not abandoned them. But here's the question: why then? Why did this mysterious relic appear right in the middle of one of the darkest centuries in Europe's history? Was it a divine gift meant to comfort a broken people, or was it a carefully staged presentation designed to stir up faith when the church needed it most? And of course, there's the practical side. The flood of pilgrims pouring into Lyre didn't just bring prayers, they brought money. Suddenly, this obscure little church had influence, prestige, and wealth it had never known. For local clergy, the shroud wasn't only a sacred relic, it was also an economic lifeline. Which leaves us with another uncomfortable question. Was the shroud a blessing from heaven, or a clever human invention that came at exactly the right time? Now imagine yourself as a peasant in the 14th century. You've lost family to the plague. You've watched soldiers trample your fields. Every day feels like a struggle just to survive. And then you hear whispers of a sacred cloth on display, a relic said to hold the very image of Christ. Would you believe? Would you join the crowds, cling to the hope it offered, and pray for a miracle? Or would you stand back, suspicious, wondering if this holy treasure was just a performance designed to give people something to hold on to? That's the tension that has haunted the shroud from the very beginning. It's not just about faith versus skepticism. It's about how symbols emerge in moments of crisis, and how desperate people decide whether to believe. By the year 1389, the shroud was already at the center of controversy. Bishop Pierre d'Arcis of Troyes stepped forward with a bold accusation. The cloth was nothing more than a forgery, cleverly painted by an artist. He claimed that someone had even confessed to creating it. This wasn't just a private suspicion. Darcis took his charge all the way to the top, writing an official memorandum to the Pope, urging him to put an end to what he called a deception of the faithful. His accusation raised uncomfortable questions. If the shroud was indeed painted, why did it look so unlike any other painting from the Middle Ages? Where were the brush strokes? Where were the pigments layered thick on fabric? And why did the image seem to defy the normal rules of art? Even the most skilled forgers of the time couldn't explain the strange, almost ghostly effect of the figure imprinted on the cloth. Think about it. If it was just a painting, how do we explain the fact that centuries later, under the lens of a camera, the image revealed itself as a photographic negative? How could a 14th century artist create something with properties no one would even understand until the invention of photography in the 19th century? This leaves us with a haunting dilemma. Was Bishop Darcis right, a sharp-eyed leader exposing a fraud at the very moment the church stood to profit from pilgrims? Or was he simply mistaken, unable to grasp a phenomenon far beyond the knowledge of his age? And here's a question for you. If you lived in that time, would you have sided with the bishop, convinced it was a hoax? Or would you have believed, joining the masses who saw in the shroud a glimpse of the divine? These early doubts didn't settle the matter. In fact, they only deepened the mystery. Because if the shroud was not a simple painting, then what was it? That question would follow the cloth for centuries, drawing scientists, skeptics, and believers into one of the most enduring debates in history. One of the strangest things about the Shroud of Turin is what historians call the missing years. Before the 14th century, there's no clear record of the cloth anywhere. Nothing in church archives, no references in medieval chronicles, not even a rumor in the writings of the early fathers. It's as if the shroud simply didn't exist for over 1,300 years, and then suddenly appeared in a small French village. That gap raises an uncomfortable choice. Was the cloth truly ancient, but hidden away, perhaps lost during wars, or carried in secret across continents? Or was it simply created in the Middle Ages, at the exact moment when Europe was desperate for hope? What do you think? Does silence in history make something less believable? Or does it invite us to search harder for the missing pieces? Some have tried to fill in that silence with a bold theory: the Knights Templar. This powerful military order, active during the Crusades, was rumored to guard sacred relics. When the Templars were suddenly suppressed in the early 1300s, many of their treasures vanished. Could the shroud have been among them, kept in secret, then resurfacing after the order's fall? It's a dramatic idea, and it makes for a great mystery story. But here's the truth. No surviving document links the Templars directly to the shroud. No inventory, no letter, no undeniable proof. It's speculation. Fascinating, but unproven. So let me ask you, would you lean toward believing the Templar theory, or do you demand hard evidence before you buy into the story? Then there's the image itself. This is where things get truly baffling. First, it doesn't look like a painting. There are no visible brushstrokes, no heavy layers of pigment. Nothing that screams artwork. Instead, the image seems to be a subtle change in the very surface of the fibers. Second, the wounds on the figure match the gospel accounts. Scourge marks, a spear wound in the side, nail wounds in the hands and feet. For believers, that's powerful confirmation. For skeptics, it could just mean that a clever medieval artist copied details from scripture. And then there's the strangest fact of all, the negative effect. When the shroud was first photographed in the 1890s, the image suddenly popped into sharp detail in the photographic negative. Think about that. How could a medieval forger have created something that only makes sense when seen through a technology invented centuries later? That's the paradox we're left with. On one side, there are strong reasons to doubt the missing history, the timing, even accusations of forgery. On the other, there are physical details that seem to defy explanation. So let me put the question to you. Which part puzzles you most? The 4,300-year silence, the whispers of the Templars, or the eerie photographic qualities of the image itself? Wherever you land, one thing is clear. History alone won't solve this riddle. To go further, we have to leave the dusty manuscripts behind and step into the lab, into the world of modern science, testing fibers, dating cloth, analyzing blood and pollen. And that's where the debate over the shroud becomes even more heated. The Shroud of Turin isn't just an old piece of cloth. For more than 600 years, it's been at the center of one of history's most passionate debates. And what's fascinating is this. The argument hasn't moved much since the Middle Ages. Two camps still stand face to face, believers and skeptics. For those who believe, the shroud is nothing less than the burial cloth of Jesus himself. Every mark, every wound, lines up with the gospel accounts. The scourge marks, the nails through the hands and feet, the spear wound in the side. For pilgrims, looking at the shroud has often been a deeply spiritual moment. Tears, prayers, even testimonies of healing. To them, the cloth isn't just a relic, it's a window into the passion of Christ. But skeptics tell a very different story. They argue the shroud is a clever medieval hoax, created to draw pilgrims and their money. They point out the 1,300-year gap in history, the suspicious timing of its sudden appearance in 14th century France, and the undeniable economic benefits that flowed to the church that displayed it. To them, the shroud represents not divine mystery, but human ingenuity and human greed. Here's what makes it even more compelling. After more than 6 centuries, modern science still hasn't closed the case. Tests on the cloth, carbon dating, chemical analysis, blood studies have only fueled more debate. Believers and skeptics look at the exact same evidence and walk away with opposite conclusions. So let me ask you, if you were standing in front of the shroud, what would you see? A sacred witness to the crucifixion, or a brilliant piece of medieval deception? Would you let faith guide your judgment, or demand undeniable proof? That's the heart of the mystery. The shroud forces us to confront not just history, but the way humans search for truth itself. And to move forward, we can't stay only in the realm of tradition or suspicion. We have to step into the lab, because it's in the world of modern science that the next chapter of this debate unfolds. When we step back and look at the bigger picture, the shroud isn't the only mystery caught between two worlds, faith and science. History is full of artifacts and events that stir up this same tension. On one side, you have deep spiritual conviction. On the other, the demand for hard evidence. That tug of war tells us something important about the human search for truth. The first lesson is this. Symbols are powerful. A single object, a relic, a story, even an image, can carry enormous weight for an entire community. In moments of crisis, that symbol becomes more than cloth or paint. It becomes a source of hope. People gather, they pray, they make pilgrimages. Faith takes on a visible form, rooted in something they can see and touch. But here's the second lesson. Every mystery in history has layers, social, political, and economic motives that shape the way it's perceived. A sacred relic might strengthen the reputation of a church, attract pilgrims to a struggling town, or even bolster the authority of a leader. That doesn't automatically mean the object is fake, but it does remind us that faith never exists in a vacuum. Human interests are always in play, And then there's the final takeaway. Whenever we face something mysterious, we often fall into extremes. We either believe without question, or we dismiss it outright. But wisdom calls us to a middle path, to respect faith and its power to inspire, yes, but also to pause, ask questions, and guard against being swept away by legends that may have been carefully constructed. So let me ask you, when you encounter something shrouded in mystery, what's your instinct? Do you lean into faith, trusting what it represents? Or do you pull back, analyze, and demand proof? Maybe the truth lies not in choosing one over the other, but in letting faith and reason walk together, helping us stay open to wonder while remaining grounded in clear-eyed judgment. And so, the mystery lingers. If the shroud only appeared in the 14th century, where was it during those missing 1,300 years? Who crafted it or discovered it? And why did it surface at the exact moment Europe was desperate for a symbol of faith? The question remains. The Shroud of Turin, sacred relic or masterpiece of deception. Perhaps it still guards a secret humanity isn't ready to uncover. That's history's puzzle. But what about you? What do you think the shroud really is? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read them, and we'd love to hear your perspective. And if this mystery pulled you in, make sure to subscribe, because there are many more riddles waiting in the shadows.